Hello, and welcome back to Honors Bio. So, we've now talked through natural selection, the process, how it happens, all of these things. But we can't really go much further without talking about Darwin. I'm sure you've heard Darwin before. He's the guy, he's the person that proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection. So, Darwin's the one that kind of proposed this grandiose theory is like, hey, this is how this happens, this change over time. To give you some background on Darwin, Darwin actually took a page from geography, is actually in geology, is actually where he took a page from. Um, the kind of this theory has been building ever since we had Nicholas Steno way back in the 1400s. And was really what Nicholas Steno saw. Steno was the first real kind of geologist, and he's the one that proposed the theory that oldest oldest rocks are at the bottom, youngest rocks are at the top, and this whole kind of fossil record theory, and saw how like Steno saw these fossils and was, hey, this looks very similar to animals that we have today. So Steno is kind of where this theory started. And then we went through a bunch of really major advances in geology and geography. And what these scientists figured out was that, and the idea that was postulated at the time was that change on the earth was gradual. And there's a gradual change in the earth, just over time. It's a very gradual change, not sharp changes. So Darwin was really interested in this work of these geologists, of this theory that change on the earth is gradual, happens slowly over time. At the same time, kind of as Darwin was coming about and doing his study at the University of Cambridge, um, Charles Linnaeus came up with the Linnaeus system of classification, and that's how we still do the classifying system today. We use the Linnaeus system. This idea of like genus species came from Linnaeus. Everything has a proper name for it. It's based off of the Linnaeus system. Well, when Linnaeus was first doing his speciation, labeling species and naming a bunch of different species, he that took over too. So there was the idea of finding new species so you could name it based on Linnaeus's classification system. So this idea of trying to group species and what's similar, what do they have in common? Do they belong in this family? Do they belong in that family? That was really common too. Was this idea of, well, what is a species? And how do we define species? What makes a new species and what isn't a new species? So Darwin came in, what that this budding of this geology, really geography movement coming forward. Linnaeus has his classification system that's taking over the world at the time. And Darwin thought about, well, how do we get new species? Like, where do species come from? In what he did, he took a famous voyage on the HMS Beagle. So Darwin sailed around the world. It was like a 2 year long expedition, um, and he carefully studied thousands of different plants and animals. This is well, this is the voyage. So they started up here in England in Plymouth, um, sailed around. They sailed to down here, through South America, all of these things, up to the Galapagos Island where Darwin would postulate this theory, would really solidify his theory, across to Australia, which Darwin made a really interesting observation that the marsupials that have developed in Australia look very similar to the mammals that developed in the European grasslands. And he was seeing a lot of these common similarities between plants and animals in different locations. They all had these same adaptations or these same variations, but we label them as different species. So he's like, well, hold on a second here. What's going on? So then we hit the Galapagos Islands. Now, the Galapagos Island, Darwin found weird plants and animals that you can still find today. Well, some of them you can find today. Right off the coast of South America, almost right at the equator, is these Galapagos Islands here, and you can still visit them today. You can go and visit these, and they're exactly the same as how Darwin found them. But what he found would really influence his work and kind of drive his idea of, how do all these species look the same but live in different places? Basically, is what he was trying to figure out. So what he found giant tortoises. I believe these are functionally extinct. I think there's only one or two left in the world. So these are pretty much extinct. But he found these giant tortoises. The wonderful blue-footed booby he found, which is the only one you will be able to find with these wonderful, colorful blue feet. And then he found some really strange variations of species, right? Um, he found this plant. I forget what the actual name is, but this is one of the only plants that has this kind of really center vein pattern. Most of them are either like maple leaves that leaf out or oak leaves, and almost none of them kind of wrap back around to form this perfect circle here. So he found a bunch of iguanas, these kind of lizard type things here, that can swim. These iguanas can swim, which is something no one's ever seen before. Um, he also found flightless cormorants, which are birds, but they're not able to fly. So these Galapagos Islands gave him a lot of weird species to study and look at and try to figure it out. Well, Darwin actually postulated his theory around finches. We call them Darwin's finches. Um, and you may have heard of these before, but so these different islands, what he was finding was these different islands had different types of finches that were not found on any other island. So almost each island has its own type of finch, which was weird because they should all have the same type of bird. So they should all be the same finches, but they weren't. And what Darwin found just by observing these finches is that all of these finches had different beaks. Their beaks were different, and their beaks were perfectly suited for the food that was found on each island. So each island had a different food available to these birds. So some of these birds that ate insects had beaks perfect for eating insects. Others that ate buds on flowers, perfect. Or these seed eaters had perfect beaks to match the food source. So the whole idea of how natural selection started, right? Of Darwin's idea of natural selection, of how the environment selecting for adaptations started from finches. So yeah, so that's all I got. If you have any questions, just let me know. Other than that, have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you when I see you.